When most of us think about bipolar disorder, our minds jump straight to the mood swings, right? The intense highs, the crushing lows. But what if that's just the surface? What if underneath all that, the illness is actually physically changing a person's brain and body over time? That's exactly what we're diving into today. It's a concept researchers are calling neuroprogression, and it changes everything.
Okay, to really get why this is so important, let's just start with this number. It's a tough one. On average, having bipolar disorder can shorten a person's life by 8 to 12 years. Yeah, that's a huge deal. And it's a stark reminder that this isn't just about mood. We're talking about a chronic, whole-body illness that has very real, very serious consequences for a person's health.
So what's actually going on here? What's the biological engine driving this? Well, it all comes down to this idea of neuroprogression. The simplest way to think about it is like a vicious cycle, a biological feedback loop. It goes something like this. A mood episode happens, and that episode itself causes tiny bits of, let's call it, stress or injury to the brain. Now, those biological changes actually make the brain more vulnerable to future episodes, and then another episode happens, causing more changes, and around it goes. It's this cycle that scientists are trying to figure out how to break.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll talk about how the illness is more than just mood swings. Then, we'll actually look inside the changing brain. From there, we'll see why this is really a whole body condition. And finally, we'll get to the exciting part, what this all means for the future of treatment.
Okay, Section 1, more than mood swings. So let's start with what doctors and patients actually see happening over time. For some people, bipolar disorder isn't a static thing. It evolves. Researchers call this clinical progression, and it basically means that as the years go by and more mood episodes occur, the illness can become more severe and harder to manage.
In this progression, it has really serious knock-on effects. Remember that feedback loop we talked about? Well, here's what it looks like in real life. You get a higher risk of future episodes. The episodes themselves can last longer and feel more severe. The threshold for what triggers an episode gets lower and lower. And some of the research even points to a higher risk for dementia down the road. So you can see how each episode can kind of dig the trench a little deeper for the next one.
So if that's what's happening on the outside, what's going on the inside? Let's get to the core of it now, the brain itself. Thanks to amazing tools like neuroimaging, we can literally peer inside and see the physical, structural changes that are linked to the progression of bipolar disorder.
All right, so what are we seeing? Well, one of the most consistent findings across tons of studies is this. The ventricles in the brain get larger. Now, ventricles are just the fluid-filled spaces deep inside your brain. And what massive research projects have found is that these spaces can expand faster in people with bipolar disorder than in people without it. It's a really solid piece of evidence.
And it's not just the spaces inside the brain. We're also seeing changes to the brain's outer layer, the cortex. The wrinkly gray matter that does all our complex thinking. The research shows that this layer can actually get thinner over time, and at a faster rate than normal aging. This seems to happen especially in the frontal parts of the brain, the parts responsible for things like planning and decision-making. And this thinning seems to be linked to how long a person has had the illness.
But okay, this is where science gets really interesting and messy. It's not always a super clear-cut story. So is the evidence for this gray matter loss always straightforward? Well, not exactly. And that complexity is what researchers are really digging into right now.
So here's the debate in a nutshell. On one side, you have a lot of studies showing that yes, in later stages of the illness, there's a decrease in gray matter, and it's connected to problems with thinking and more frequent episodes. But on the other side, you have some studies that don't find a significant difference at all. A few have even found the opposite. It just goes to show you, we're still putting the pieces of this puzzle together, and the relationship is definitely more complex than we first thought.
And this is a really important and hopeful piece of that puzzle. Because hidden in all this data about brain changes, there are also signs of protection. Get this, one big study that followed patients over time found that those who were taking lithium, a cornerstone treatment for bipolar disorder, actually showed an increase in the thickness of their cortex in one region. An increase! This is huge, because it suggests that treatments might not just manage moods, they might actually be protecting the brain.
Okay, so we've been deep inside the brain, but the story doesn't stop there. This is really key. What happens in the brain doesn't stay in the brain. The same processes have ripple effects throughout the entire body. This really paints a picture of bipolar disorder as a whole-body condition.
And one of the biggest players in this whole-body story is inflammation, specifically neuroinflammation. Let's walk through how this cycle works. Step 1. A mood episode causes some stress or injury to brain cells. Step 2. Those injured cells send out these little alarm signals. Think of them like distress flares. Step 3. The brain's own immune cells, called microglia, see these flares and jump into action. And step 4. These activated immune cells release inflammatory chemicals, which can cause more stress and keep the whole cycle going. See, it's another one of those dangerous feedback loops.
And the amazing thing is, we can actually see the evidence of this fire, so to speak, in the blood. When researchers look at blood samples from people in the later stages of bipolar disorder, they find higher levels of all these inflammatory markers, things like TNF-alpha and interleukin-6. They also see signs of something called oxidative stress. This is proof positive that the inflammation isn't just locked away in the brain, it's circulating throughout the entire body.
Okay, let's go even deeper, down to the cellular level. There's another key process here called endoplasmic reticulum stress, or just ER stress. Now, every one of your cells has this little factory inside it called the endoplasmic reticulum. Its main job is to fold proteins correctly. But if that factory gets overwhelmed and starts producing a bunch of junk, misfolded proteins, the whole cell gets stressed out. It has safety systems to deal with this, but if the stress just keeps coming, the cell can basically give up and self-destruct.
And here's what's so fascinating. This cellular stress response seems to change as the illness progresses. In the early stages, it looks like those cellular safety systems are working just fine. The cell is resilient. But in the later stages of bipolar disorder, that protective response seems to get worn down. It becomes impaired. This means the cells are way more vulnerable and more likely to go down that path of self-destruction. It's another biological marker of this progression we're talking about.
So, after all this deep, complex science, what's the point? Where is all of this heading? Well, it's all heading towards a better future for treatment. This research is creating a massive shift in how we even approach the idea of caring for someone with bipolar disorder.
And here's the paradigm shift. It's a huge one. For a long time, the focus was on managing the current crisis, treating the depression, managing the mania. But now, the goal is shifting. It's becoming about managing the entire course of the illness over a lifetime. The new frontier is trying to prevent this progression from ever taking hold. It's about preserving brain health and function for the long haul.
So, what does that path forward look like? It's pretty exciting, actually. We're talking about more long-term studies following patients for years to really map out these changes. We're using more powerful brain imaging to spot the warning signs even earlier. We're even bringing in artificial intelligence to crunch all of this data and help predict who is most at risk. And the end game for all of this? To create treatments that are targeted, that go right to the biological source of the problem instead of just papering over the symptoms. Which brings us to the final and most hopeful question of all, the one that drives every single researcher in this field. If we can understand all of this, the inflammation, the cellular stress, the brain changes, can we actually stop the progression before it even starts? Can we intervene so early and so effectively that the illness never gets a chance to take root and progress? That, right there, that's the ultimate goal. And it represents a whole new world of hope for so many people.